Yes, exactly, right now. So welcome all and welcome, Oliver. I would say the stage is yours.
Very much. Yeah, thank you very much, guys. And it's my pleasure to be with you. The good thing is you can see the presentation, right, Marlene? Just to double check. Perfect. So it's not just me here in the call. Perhaps it's a good start to. It's good to start with. There are also a couple of guys from Talentry here in the call. You will see Julian here. You will see Walter. I have seen already here. I see Anastasia, and I think I have seen also Michelle in the call. So we are technically in Melina potentially. Not sure. And we are a couple of more people here from Talentry in the call. So therefore, I think you have the chance to talk with a bunch of guys on different levels on and about recruiting. So we have prepared a brief presentation. It's more, I would say, a company presentation, but that should not prevent us from drilling a bit deeper into the topic. Technically, my name is Oliver Kempkens. I'm a senior partner at Talentry and part of the advisory board. I'm having a switch role at the moment because I'm supporting, on the one hand, I would say, all non-operative stuff, strategic stuff, discussions about quality, about, I would say, the position of the firm, but I'm also supporting the one or the other search. In my 9-to-5 day, I'm working at the moment at Sberbank. It's a Russian company, it's a Russian bank. It's the largest Russian bank with 330,000 employees. And here I'm a managing director for a field I would call HR analytics. So we're having an internal, I wouldn't say it's startup, but we are building a product similar to SAP SuccessFactors or similar to Workday, where we are essentially trying to serve the Eastern European market with. And in this position, I'm responsible for around 1,400 people at the moment, right? So we have around 15 cluster leads, around 45 different products, and we are creating a platform for HR services. However, being associated with Talentry, I am associated with Talentry for around, let me think, 5 or 6 years now. So my career, I would say, more or less started in 2010 when I joined SAP in Palo Alto. So I was more or less hired by Hasso Plattner, the founder of SAP. He brought me to Palo Alto, which is in California, close to San Francisco. Stanford University is nearby. And I was responsible for the implementation, I would say, of design thinking and agile software technologies in the organization. And at the end, I was also responsible for all workspaces of SAP worldwide. So my aim was more or less a cultural aim, right? So I wanted to somewhat equip developers and decision makers with tools so that they can make more user-centered decisions. And after I left SAP, it was in 2015, I joined Russell Reynolds, which is an executive search boutique, executive search firm, quite elitist. For you to get an idea what that means, elitist. So when Apple is looking for a CFO, they're using Russell Reynolds. So in Germany, we have Egon Zehnder, there's Stuart Spencer, there are Korn Ferry and others, but I would say on a global level, it is Russell Reynolds. And then for a long time, there's no one else coming, and I was responsible for digital board position. So I had a couple of top executive hires in the supervisory board and in the board of directors. And it was great. It was a great journey, to be honest, because I learned technically how to interview, and especially we had a different look also on how can we assess candidates? How can we find out whether a candidate is a good fit? And if you do this on top level, of course, and you potentially are looking into more stylistical opportunities and possibilities than what you would do usually from a startup perspective. And I think this is one of the great things we can bring together within Talentry, right? On the one hand, we're looking for agile we are supporting agile companies, but I would say with know-how and on the quality way how a large firm would do this. So therefore, what is the aim of this presentation? We would like to give you a brief glimpse of how we are, what we are doing, and also then we would like to explain you, how hiring usually works from us. And then we can discuss how that works for startups and also what the timelines are, what are the pitfalls, and what are potentially also the challenges. I can only invite you to ask questions, right? Because I would say that technically I know what I'm talking about without bragging, but I would say I've seen the presentation. We created this presentation together, so I more or less know the structure of it. And I would say, the beauty of a discussion is technically that you can give it a shape. So therefore, ask questions vividly. You can also interrupt me if you want. We can really go into constructive discussions. I'm completely okay with that. I don't need to finish the presentation, but I try if there are no questions coming in 10-15 minutes so that we have enough time for that. Yeah, a couple of words about ourselves. I mean, we are an executive search boutique for the European tech and startup digital ecosystem, and we are focusing on startups technically from everything, right? From angel to Series B, C, D, whatever that means. And when we are talking about startups, I think we should also not forget we are also supporting new projects which are built in cooperation. So meaning, for example, a huge consultancy is looking for a digital arm that is not so much in trend anymore, but it was in trend in 2015, 2016. We were also supporting them, right? And in general, our philosophy is that we have a quite diverse team of experts on the operational level, but also on a non-operational level, right? So I will come to a slide of the people in a couple of seconds where you can see. So we are living essentially from our network, and that was always very important to us. We have quite flat hierarchies, right? We are not making a big deal of things. I'm now wearing a suit, or at least a jacket, not a suit, because I'm in my at Sberbank at the moment. But usually I would not do this, right? So we are absolutely status free to some extent. We are looking essentially on content, which means on the qualities and qualifications of candidates, and trying to get beyond on what's written on the CV. And our sweet spot is that we are focused on clean tech. So we love tech companies, but Julian has a huge footprint in clean tech stuff. And this is something where we are, I would say, specifically looking into. And also for you to understand, I have closed last year an investment round for a solid state capacitor. And we are starting this project right now, which is also going into the field of clean tech. That is simply what we like to do, and that is simply also where we see, where we can say that we can deliver value also as an organization with our network over the next 10, 15, 20 years potentially and more. So what are we offering? We are offering executive search, right? We will specify that in a couple of seconds, which does not mean that we are not hiring experts. We're also hiring experts. Experts, for you to understand, expert is technically someone, to make it very simple, who has a great expert, but who has not necessarily management tasks, who has not a team. So we are hiring experts and, of course, executives. Very often when we are being approached, because it's a matter, of course, when you're working together with a headhunter, with a recruiter, at the end, it costs money. Right. So very often companies are, especially in Europe or in Central Europe, or continental Europe, are not at the very beginning looking for recruiters, for experts. So a lot of our tasks are simply executives, right? A lot of our jobs are executives. We're hiring non-executive people, so that means advisors, board members, supervisory board members, advisory board members, and also part-time stuff we are doing, right? Sometimes we are covering interim management, we're doing cultural assessments. We are offering technically recruitment as a service. So we are deploying one of our specialists in your team, full-time, part-time, or whatever, and he's then setting up with you a talent pipeline. He's setting up with you the right recruitment processes. And we are also supporting you in establishing your HR department in the organization. Here again, depending on the size of the organization, of course. If you're just 5 to 10 people, that's potentially not necessary. But what we could do is technically we could help you, we could upskill you in HR processes. So I said our core business is technically a leadership level, right? Leadership, management, what's the difference? Well, a leader gives more vision, management is more exploiting on an existing vision. Startups technically have to develop a vision and they have to prove the vision. So therefore, we call it here purposely leadership level or leader level, right? But as also said, expert level. What does it mean tech? That does not mean we are only recruiting CTOs, but we are recruiting everything which is associated to tech firms. So today, if you think about, if you would like to serve your clients, let's say only via e-commerce, that's a quite technical job, right? If you think about data analytics, performance marketing, and all of the other fields behind. And also if you're of course selling software, let it be SaaS software, or let it be also, on-demand software or whatever, it is technically a technical job. So therefore we are calling ourselves tech recruiter, which does not necessarily only mean that we are hiring CTOs and engineers. That means everyone who's somehow associated to this. And we consider, for example, CRM and sales as non-tech positions, however, associated to the tech industry. So we are trying to be a one-stop shop for tech and digital growth. And I think we have proven that in the past also. And we'll come to a couple of cases afterwards as well. Just check now, the stupid thing here is in the way. I cannot, okay, got it. Sorry. So I would like, this is technically the core of the presentation I would like to talk about, because very often when we are supporting startups and when you're hiring someone for a startup, it is always a consulting job, Why is it a consulting job? Because you're trying to provide market insights, you're explaining the competitors landscape, and you're also explaining very often startups in general, hey, how does recruiting work? And hey, how do we make decisions? How can we, is it just an interview? What is an interview, by the way, right? I mean, how can you do an insight-driven interview? Do you just sit down and then talk what someone did? Or how can we assess people? This is a discussion we are having very often, and this is also a discussion which we are having with startup founders which are in their 50s. Because of course they have corporate experience and of course they have hired people, but hiring corporate is different than hiring in your own startup. You're responsible. Corporate, there's technically always the HR department who can help, but who is also to blame. You should not underestimate that. You can always finger point on someone. This is nothing, and this is a shift you can see. So I know a lot of people who have hired quite fast in corporate environments, but who are super slow hires in their own startups, because there you're having more doubts, right? You want technically to make the one good decision for many reasons. The hiring process takes time, and here you can see that also in the background, right? If you calculate all the time up, so we are talking about 12 months approximately. So that means 3 months time to hire someone. Then you need to onboard him, right? He needs to technically also, onboard, hiring. Then there's the cancellation period. You need to wait for him, and then you need to onboard him. So depending on what for candidate and what for profile you're looking for, that can take quite a long time. So therefore, you want to make a good decision in the process, because also for startups, and this is also one of our experience we are seeing, is that when we are hiring for startups, and we had around 320 placements in the last couple of years, the people we are hiring are not free on the market. We are technically getting 2 other companies and motivating, or not 2 other companies, but to people who work for other companies and motivating them to join a more interesting project. So there is a huge time delay from the moment that you say, now I need someone, to the moment that you say, now I have him. That simply takes time. And our process and the recruitment process, we can say takes up to 12 weeks. And 12 weeks, that means that is not necessarily meant put in stone just because you're working with a recruiter. I would say this is very often even a bit faster. But I mean, it starts everything with a briefing, right? Let it be internally or externally, but you need to sit down and think about, okay, which competencies do I would like to see in the person who is joining my firm? What are the tasks? What are the experiences? Do I want to hire based on experience? Meaning, does he have a system and he can replicate it in my organization? And by the way, what I do, is there someone in the market who can realistically join me, who has a system? Or am I potentially underfunded or not funded enough? So I need someone from Rocket, but I technically cannot afford. Or I have an institutional investor who's, for example, not really interested into giving virtual shares to a position who's joining. We have all seen this. So this briefing usually, which is happening with us, happens also on your side. And this takes time. With us, it's potentially 1 day. Couple of hours, right? Writing forth the back. Then we have a sequence together where we're discussing technically out the briefing. But the pre-work for that can take time. And this is also something where Julian, who's the CEO and mainly the founder, and who's mainly running all the sales process, where he is not just having a sales pitch, he's discussing on many different touch points with the startup and with the founders on what they're really looking for, and whether what they're looking for is somehow matchable to what is existing in the market. So this briefing period, which is here indicated as 1 time, is technically just for writing it down, right, on your side and our side. But the period before, to get clarity what you need and whether you can find what you need, that takes more time. Then we are going something what we are calling into active search. So once we're having the briefing described, we are looking for profiles. We are looking for profiles which we will present to you as so-called calibration candidates. That's the second level of our, I would say, search briefing, where we are trying to understand that based on what you told us and based on what we see in a CV, is that something what you want, what you really are looking for? And we are trying in this calibration also to be a bit edgy, to show a couple of candidates which are potentially, I would say, on the outskirts of the briefing, but in order to see whether this, what you told us, is really what is needed, or if you would react differently based on what you see on paper. That comes a little bit from, I would call it from this agile methodology, also from a design thinking methodology, where we are trying to build a prototype first, right? A prototype, an archetype of a candidate, showing that to you, and you can give us feedback, and we can see very often that the search, as we started before, based on a briefing, iterates and develops a little bit into a different field. And I think this is one of the expertise which I would say recruiters or people who are working in recruiting can bring to you, right? Because they have technically the market knowledge, because they're working full time on this stuff. They are seeing profiles. So they are developing expertise and experience based on also other searches, which are adjacent to you, which are not similar necessarily, but which are adjacent to you. So the fact of experience and of course, market knowledge counts here. After we have done this calibration, how we call it, right, we would go into the real search, where we are looking for candidates based on the two level briefing, and we would also speak to them. How would that look like? Technically, we have a quite huge network. We are using our network. We are using our existing internal database, but we are also using our external database, sources like Xing, like LinkedIn, but also sources like, when it comes to experts, like GitHub and others. However, we're trying always to cross-verify a little bit before we talk to people, right? So we are trying to get a feeling whether someone has a specific reputation in the market, so that we can make sure that we can shorten the process as best as possible and can present you also the better candidates at the beginning than at the end. Usually, also for you to understand, the search is not getting better, to put it on a very placative, to put it very placatively. It's not, usually we are having a quite good understanding of whom we are looking for, and then we are contacting them first, of course, right? So what are we doing then? I mean, technically we are identifying the candidate, we are contacting the candidate, and we are interviewing the candidate. Usually it's a two-step approach, so we are having technically a two-level approach. So we are talking twice to the candidate. When we are thinking that the candidate is somehow qualified, we are writing a so-called candidate letter. The candidate letter is a mix of the CV and the discussions we are having, which is somehow arguing why we believe that this candidate would be a good fit for you. We would send this over to you. You would review this. You would go via your own matrix over the profile. And when you're saying, yeah, I believe that Peter may be a good candidate, we would introduce you. And then you're taking usually over the process. Then this candidate is technically insourced by you. One could say you're taking this process over, and we are then in the background just collecting feedback from your side, from his side or her side. Why are we doing this? Because the lack of experience from time to time, and again, this is not criticism, this is just reality. Hey man, you guys have other stuff to do, right? Leads to the fact that sometimes there's this moment of being overworked, or you forgot to ask relevant questions, or you had some own concerns, right? And this is stuff what we can solve in the back end. This is feedback we can take over and we can play back to the candidate, and then we can, I would say, we can play then the proper information or an adjusted information, or simply our opinion to you in I would call it in a micro-invasive way, in a non-formalized way. The formalized way would be that you would have a second call with the candidate, right? And that, of course, on both sides may seem, depending on how you're steering the process, also a bit surprising. Especially when we are communicating, hey, you will speak once to the founder, then you will speak to an advisory board member, then to the investor, and then it's a subject to, I don't know, references, and then to the draft contract. And if you're then integrating a second step, we have the one or the other candidate, especially the more senior ones, and they're saying, okay, am I not good enough? Or perhaps they don't know what they want, because you as a startup, of course, you're not Siemens, right? You're not BMW, you're not Sberbank in Russia. You're technically someone who's also pitching to a candidate. Because what we can also see that the good senior positions in startups, the people there, they have quite a lot of choice. So meaning from our side, from your side, is always a pitch, despite you find that your project is the best in the world and it's the most relevant in the world, and only your project has the chance to become a unicorn. Well, that is completely clear, but we somehow need to level and to balance these both perspectives. On the one hand, a candidate who knows I did it before, right? And I have choice, versus you who are saying I am the best. So this is also, I would say, a communication, cultural, procedural, interesting momentum where we need to bring both parties quite together. And we are trying to do this in a I would say, micro-invasive way. That means also that when we are presenting a candidate, we are not necessarily overselling them. I think we are writing candidate letters, if I compare that with other firms, without finger pointing on them. Don't get me wrong, but it's simply it's our, I would say, code of conduct, our mentality and our philosophy. We are trying to describe them as neutral as possible. We're describing facts, motivations, what he has done in the past, what motivated him, why he did things in the past, and then we are describing I would say, a quite neutral motivation of the candidate, of him or her, why he would like to change, without saying that he says that you are the only company in the world, and that makes sense, right? We're trying to describe it based on the facts what we are seeing. This is in general how the process looked like. And as I said, we are handing over at this point when we qualified someone. Then it's technically your turn. And this is also a turn we are discussing up front with you, how your process will look like. Who needs to interview a potential candidate? Who needs to interview the CEO versus the CTO, if he's also part of the Handelsregister or put into the Handelsregister? And who's interviewing the lead engineer or the chief data scientist or the VP HR? So we are trying to find with you a quite, I would say, solid process, which is streamlined and which is helping you effectively to reduce the risk that this candidate is not performing in the role you would like him to undertake. I see a couple of messages in the chat. Let me just check whether there are some questions. I need to pull some things away.
Yes, I already had 2 questions. Because you said people sometimes forget relevant questions to ask. So you get more?
No, Marlene, you're gone. You're gone, I think. Okay. No, I get a couple of more people in because they were just requesting, but I can read the questions. So what are relevant questions people forget to ask? Do you have a kind of 5 questions you should always ask? No, I don't. No, I don't. And I'm hiring also a personal assistant here at the moment for our team assistant. And she said to me that it was a super nice talk. It was one of the best interviews because I was not asking where she sees herself in 5 years. And this is one of the things what you can for sure read in any of these magazines, right? Which I don't know, but this is a stupid question. What should you answer to this? I mean, I would say, I mean, to make a point here very clear, I would not answer this question, and that would be the end for me personally of the interview. But I can understand if some people are trying to ask, but the question is always, why do you ask that, right? So you need to clarify what is the intention you are having by asking this question. If you're asking me what are the 5 questions you should always ask, I think it's important to understand what did someone do in the past and why. And why did he make changes, and what his or her contribution was in this field. This is a very interesting point, because when you work in a team, right, when you work in a startup, right, when you work with people, and I mean, all the CVs always look great, I would say, right? But we need to understand what you are really responsible for, and what your contribution was, and why you decided in a way how you decided. This, without being too psychological, of course, right? So you need to find the right balance. But I think this is important to understand. Why acted someone in a way, and under which condition has he or she acted in this way? Because we all perform in context. I mean, I'm sure you yourself know that. If you think about your studies, if you think about your school, and I know it for sure by myself, there were teachers I was way performing better despite that I didn't like the topic. And I've also experienced teachers, right, where I performed bad in a topic where I was usually good at. That is the matter of context. And this aspect, which is technically called team dynamics, right, social psychology, organizational psychology, is unlocking motivation and performance. And this is something what you need to find out in the discussion. It's not so important whether someone knows, I would say, where he or she wants to be in 5 years, or at least, I mean, we all have an abstract vision, right? We want to be married, want to have kids, fair enough, right? But you can potentially say that you want to become a C-level board position, or you would have a C-level board position in a medium-sized company. Well, that's fair enough, right? But what kind of software you would like to write, whether you would like to work B2B or B2C, I would say that these are technically questions and answers you cannot expect from someone. How important is personality compared to talent? Well, that's a good question, right? I mean, technically, you can always hire based on experience or talent, what you achieved in the past, or technically how someone is being presenting himself, and it's a bet on the future. I think there's no right or wrong, to be very honest. It depends a little bit on also how you steer the process, and also what you are for a type of person, right? And also, I mean, in which stage you are of a company, right? Are you looking for someone who's more risk averse because you're looking for the head of accounting or the head of controlling? Well, potentially someone who's taking risk may not be the right one. I mean, I can tell about myself. I had companies before. I would say I now finance, but I would not apply technically for a CFO position. It's not, I mean, intellectually, I'm more than capable, but I would say that based on the way on how I worked in the past, that would mean a too big shift on how I assess and take risks for myself. So if someone would offer me this job, I would only do this interimistically, right? But I would never do this on a day-to-day basis. How do you know you're hiring a builder? Well, That's a good question, right? This is, I mean, to be very honest, you never will 100% know. This is something you need to get rid of this thought that you will know. Of course, accept experience is a good point. Right, that's a good point, especially if you have someone who has done that several times. I mean, when you're talking builder, you potentially mean also someone who has a growth idea. So meaning that if you hired someone who has done it several times, I think it's a good aspect, right? If you are hiring someone who has done it once for a long time, it could work for you depending on the industry you're playing in. If it's about B2B, it may work. If it's B2C, potentially you could think also differently about it. But I think the past tells you something, and especially it is, I would say here, important that you're looking into the fact, I mean, how has he performed over a period in the past positions? Ideally, has worked in different concepts or in different contexts, so in different organizations or different units, and what has he applied there, right? I mean, how was he building his own growth, or how he was building his build strategy? And this is something what you can for sure find out in an interview, in a discussion, without trying to, let's say, to pull or not to pull, but to suck potentially all the knowledge he has, but in a friendly way, right? That you're saying, I mean, to be very honest, it is very impressive what you did at ABC, right? Just give me an example. I mean, how did you come up first time with this, and what did you learn on your first stage, and when you move to the second stage, what have you changed in your approach? And when you hear then someone starting to talk about these things, then you will get a very good feeling of whether he's knowledgeable or whether there's just some theoretical knowledge. Then enhance this with references and potentially with a psychometrical test, I think, with a case, and I think then you have a quite good picture, sound picture. But for you to understand, the full security you will never have. Right? There's no absolute truth, as Hegel said, right? There's only divine truth, and we all have only subjective truth. So therefore, I think this is a good thought to get rid of, right? We are trying to reduce the risk as best as possible. And what we're also trying to do is, just need to let one more guy in, what we're also trying to do is we need to understand that all the information we are accumulating in this discussion with the gentleman or with the lady is technically only a data point. And this data point is not objective, right? So we don't want to qualify someone. We are qualifying someone for a role. The role at my organization. But we don't want to say that he is a good or in general a bad person. That are not the dimensions we are thinking in. We are thinking in dimensions of fit and non-fit. And fit is technically what you guys have said, what you said also right on in chat here is experience and know-how, subject matter expertise, and personality fit. Right? And personality fit, how can you test that? Again, here references. References 360 degrees, top, peer, and colleagues or subordinates. And you can test it, of course, if you bring them together to a team event. What we are doing at Talentry when we are hiring, I mean, we have a couple of steps, of course. So we are technically a potential candidate is talking to all of the people who are at least here in the call, right? And then we are sharing feedback, but we are also inviting them to a general team meeting. So we bring him on site, and then we are having an informal lunch, because we also want to see, I mean, look, how someone is acting on an informal level, right? Whether he fits to us, and he will also get a feeling, or she will get a feeling, right? He or she will fit to us. There's a question, Julian, what do you think of psychometrics? Julian, I don't know whether you're eligible to ask a question here, but I will answer anyhow. So about psychometrics, I'm personally a big fan. But here again, right, if you would like to check psychometrics, so then you need to be aware of what you're looking for, because there's a bunch of different psychometrical tests out in the world. You need to know what you're looking for, what kind of profile you're looking for. And then here again, the objectification of a personality can only be described as a try, right? As a try. So meaning that we are covering somewhat the person, and we are framing somewhat the person how he is, but the psychometric test can have also slightly different results. So you need to accept that as one data point which can support your decision, whether he or she is a good or perhaps a not so a fitting or not so fitting candidate. So therefore, I think it's nice to see, and it shows you also if you do it. I don't know whether you guys have already did, or whether you have ever did a psychometric test about yourself. If you don't know, then technically it explains you what is your perspective to risk. How would you, based on the test, respond to risk taking, for example, to resilience topics? That gives you an idea how people would see you. This is not so bad, right? And again, it tries to objectify competencies on a personal level. So who is Talentry? We are quite diverse team, as we said, right? We are consisting of a bunch of people, and I see when I look at the slide, I think the one or the other working student is even missing on this slide. But essentially, as said, Julian von Blücher, who joined the call, he's CEO and founder. We have Matthias, who's technically head of operations, Sebastian, who's a recruitment consultant, similar to Walter, to Anka, to Melina, Michelle, and also Nastya, who's doing from time to time, who's doing a mix between research and consulting. And then we have a couple of talent scouts, so people who are technically just looking for talent in the market on different means and different ways. This is Stefan. We have a sales consultant with Sebastian. He's supporting especially Julian, and then our executive assistant is Anna. Just go further. Again, stupid thing, sorry. So what we also said, then, despite that there are companies which are forwarding LinkedIn profiles or general CVs, we don't see ourselves as a CV pusher, how we call it, right? There are a lot of this kind of stuff is, I mean, it's a different business model simply. There's nothing wrong about that, right? And I know that especially in Britain, it's quite popular. Why is it quite popular? Because the British labor law allows people allows companies to get rid of people faster. So meaning that in the British culture, they're hiring people also faster if it's not subject to relocation. But in general, due to the fact that our labor law is quite strict in Germany, the recruitment processes are longer than the ones in Britain. Because in Britain, they know, okay, I can get rid of the gentleman, and it's also more a cultural notion. But for you to understand, I mean, who's managing the firm? It's Julian, as said, right? And I'm supporting him. And then we have a quite extensive advisory board, which we are utilizing quite often. Utilizing meaning we are using them actively for our searches. So we are discussing specific searches with the matching advisory board members, consisting of Michael Hagenau, the ex-CEO of Delivery Hero, Suhalia Ufata, the director of BMW iVentures, and potentially to name Adrian Frenzel, the ex-CEO of HelloFresh USA, who built the firm. So we have quite some good names there, and they are really thankfully, and this is, I think, also subject to Julian's effort, they're really active in our searches and contributing with good ideas and also great insights into their networks. We live customer intimacy. Yeah, I mean, as said, we have no traditional, I would say, industrial focus. Our focus is really the development stage the firm is in. So instead of a vertical, we are focusing on horizontal stages, and there with a personal orientation towards clean tech, right, where we have, I think, a couple of quite interesting references like Tado, Polarstern, Skeleton Technologies, but we're also serving fintechs like Allianz, GetSafe, Finconomy, Munich Re, also the larger ones. We have a couple of future mobility topics, Tesla, Volocopter, we did a lot, Cluno, we did a lot, but also we have consulting experience with Siemens and RC Digital, and of course, the smart lifestyle and direct-to-home stuff like Delivery Hero, Freeletics, Vio, eGym, and others. So again, here our sweet spot is more in the growth field of the organization, not so much in the vector. A couple of clients we worked with, I mean, we worked with people like Daniel Sobani from Freeletics, like Michael Hagenau, as I mentioned before, but also Florian Fuchs from Do. It's always quite interesting to work and to support we can say our colleagues over there, our partners, because technically it is also, we are becoming over the period of time a partner for their growth, right? So meaning that very often we are not just knowing the company by having met them once, no, but we are following them, we are discussing with them because we are all the same age, more or less, right? So this is really interesting also that we can see people moving, that they are sharing the insights with us. So I think this is a quite nice sweet spot we're acting in as a consulting or executive researcher who's focusing especially on these growth momentums. 2 case studies, I mean, briefly mentioned, we worked for Volocopter, right? And the task was, of course, from the board to find the best CEO in the world, especially in the new flight class. We screened the European ecosystem. We found a visionary manager, and he understood this as a quite unique opportunity. We could convince him, which was quite nice. And we customized this process tremendously, because very often when you're working with the ventures which are highly ventured, and if a key person is leaving, this is not necessarily what you want to communicate to the market, right? So we are also I would say are quite experienced in using so-called confidential searches or hidden searches, and finding ways how we can approach people, and only when they're interested in this inner perspective, we're unveiling who our client is. This, of course, expects a more, I would say, an intimate approach to our candidates, because why should I talk to you 2, 3, 4 times if I don't know whom you're representing? But I think this is here as well one of the advantages we are having with our supervisory or advisory board, that we have a quite, I would say, short way to talent on the market, and that we can keep things confidential because people know and firms know that we can deal with that. So they trust us because they know we have placed in the market quite interesting talent. And another example is redesign finance. Here, the objective was to conceptualize and build a lean employer branding website for client in the stealth mode. Similar stuff, right? How we approached that. We created a one-pager website, consulted on performance marketing measures, and initiated a recruiting process for this, right? This, in a nutshell, about talent tree and about recruiting. So I would say that the aim was to keep it quite short. I think we somewhat tried to and did it. So therefore, I would say that I would keep it open to you guys. I will start with the first question. AI is playing a very important role these days. Do you think human engagement and talent resource role will disappear in the future? Ankita, that is a good question. It's a very far-fetched question, I would say, because I can tell you that we in the bank, we're having 6,000 data scientists, right? And if you potentially remember this captcha protection from Google, it's just owned by Google, but where you have to click on the trees, right? So then you need to confirm something, and then this captcha protection comes up and it says, please click on the trees. There are 9 tiles, and please click on the trees, click on the bikes or the water hydrants or whatsoever. This is human-powered machine learning or human-powered artificial intelligence, right? Because you're technically training a bot to understand what a tree is and how a tree can be rendered across different pictures and perspectives. So when it comes to humans, it is quite complex. And this is my answer. I know that technically Apple tried in 2012 to not offer jobs anymore on the websites, but you could only technically upload your CV, and then they would match your CV with a job, but they stopped this. They stopped it because the quality of the candidates was not good enough. So I would say that still, when it comes to humans and people, and potentially that's also the good side, especially on leadership positions. I'm not talking about expert positions or mass positions, for example, like branch officers or branch managers or people who are technically who are service personnel. I'm not talking about this, but I think about when it comes to leadership, that it will be a long way. So it could be, but I think if we are thinking in time, even if it's exponential, it's potentially more 30 years out there than 5. So therefore, I would say it could disappear in the future, and for sure, some things may be automatized. I think some things will be automatically crawled. You know, GitHub is technically already on an IT expert level to try to objectify behavior and quality. And this is something I think what you can then automatize, but not necessarily via UI. This is then just a regular crawler. To this question, Ankita. More questions, or also Julian, for you potentially, right? If you would like to add something, or not just Julian, but also Walter, Melina, Michelle, Matthias, and others. How important is gender diversity for a successful startup? Well, I would say it is, right? I cannot tell you how important in percentage. I can just share with you that in general, I can tell a little bit the story that when I joined Russell Reynolds, the idea was to push gender diversity to the board level on DAX companies, and it was quite difficult. To be very honest, for many reasons. One reason was for sure there's not enough talent also in the market that people can have choice. If you think about how many female leaders are there in top positions among the top 500 German companies, there are not many, 10, 15. And again here, right, I was just saying that before, we have this cultural notion in Germany that experience to reduce risks. So I would say there's a strong tendency to always reutilize in general the people who have proven it in the past, because it gives me a good feeling on their future performance. And if you then think that potentially only 15 or 20 or 30, let us say 50, that means 10% of the top 500 leadership are female, then there's not much to reutilize. So you need always people who have technically the courage also to put someone with talent, let it be a woman or a man, into the position. This is simply one, I would say, statistical effect. But I personally believe, and here at Sberbank, we have 63% of all of our employees, of 330,000 are female, and out of our leadership, 70% is female. Russia, by the way, it's anyhow the country, so I'm commuting between Moscow and Munich, right? And due to COVID, I'm a little bit longer now in Moscow, so I'll come back next week. Russia is the country with the most female in leadership positions, and we are having the discussion here not. This discussion is non-existing because it is an artificial discussion, because people would say, but we have that. Also gender bathrooms, by the way. Every toilet in Russia is a gender bathroom, just as a little side joke. So is diversity important? Yeah, I believe so. But I believe diversity not only seen between gender, but also between cultures. Right, and I think it is important, right? Whether it is important if you're having a super, let's say, scientific product, and simply in this sphere there are not many women, well, okay, then you don't need to artificially put someone in. But if it's when it comes to e-commerce and all of these things where technically there's an equal distribution of talent, well, then I would say, why not? You should not artificially be against it. And this is also something what we are pushing. But to be very honest, we are also always asking that specifically. How do you feel about bringing the women to this position? But I can also tell you that almost none of our startups has ever said, oh no. Most of the startups are saying, of course, bring them to us. Bring them to us. So I would say that also we're having a couple of projects at the moment, and there's one I'm thinking of as a head of e-commerce, and we only had women for this position, right? And they were not mentioning, please bring us only women, but they were also saying, well, they are great, we just let them through. So that's also nice to hear. Is an optimum time or sweet spot to work with an agency consultant with direct search versus direct search? I would say no. I mean, technically, you always need to understand how your internal workload looks like, right, Damien? I mean, you need to understand how much time do I have? How much time can I contribute, right? Is it realistic that I manage that? But I can tell you, I mean, looking for someone, sometimes, of course, you have recommendations from your network or you know someone. Well, then it's brilliant. Then you don't need us. Potentially, you need us or someone like us to qualify him a little bit more objectively. You could think about it. But in general, then you don't need us. But if you have no network, and you have really no idea how to approach this, then usually I would say it is, and you're of course funded and it makes sense for you, then it could be a way how to do, what you can do. But I would not say that you should not try it yourself. Because trying it yourself also gives you the feeling, hey, am I capable? Do I like that? Can I manage that? Because I can also give you, I mean, for you to get a feeling. So when we are searching, we are having usually around, I don't know, something between 120 and 300 prospects per search. We are looking into. The shortlist is something between, I don't know, 25 and 60. And then if you think that you interview everyone once or twice, so you're having quite a lot of interaction points, right? And this over a period of 3 months, you need to put simply into your schedule. So I would say it really depends. It really depends. Right. Anything else?
No questions. Okay. I think I will stop.